They said that every Thursday night, when the moon sat like a pale coin over the savannas, the priest laid himself inside a coffin and asked no one to disturb him. The villagers believed it was a ritual of purification, a sacred act between him and God. But that was only the story he told. No one knew where the coffin truly came from, carved from dark Iroko wood, brought from deep inside the forbidden forest, where even hunters refused to walk. No one knew why the priest's shadow did not match his body when the sun rose behind him. And no one knew why, some nights, people passing the chapel swore they heard two voices praying, both coming from inside the coffin. At first, the villagers thought Father Mbeal was a holy man, sent by the colonial missionaries to bring the light of civilization. He spoke softly, healed fevers, blessed children, and buried the dead with tender hands. But there was one truth nobody dared speak aloud. Since the priest arrived, no one's grave stayed silent. Freshly buried bodies shifted beneath the earth. Dogs howled through the night and refused to go near the burial grounds. Sometimes, when the wind was still, one could hear whispers rising from underground, calling the names of the living. And each Thursday, when the priest climbed into his coffin, his face changed. His eyes rolled white. His lips turned the color of ash. And something else, something old, hungry, and patient, seemed to breathe through him. They thought he was protecting the village from a curse. But the truth was far worse. He wasn't sleeping. He was feeding. And one night, someone followed him into the chapel. Someone who should not have seen what they saw. Someone who survived just long enough to tell the tale. Before the coffin opened, the village of Kimbala rested at the edge of the Nyoko Plains, where the earth was red, the winds moved like whispers, and the trees leaned inward as though listening to secrets no human tongue should speak. Life in Kimbala was simple. Farmers rose before sunrise, hunters returned at dusk, mothers pounded yam while children chased goats, and elders sat beneath the great baobab tree telling stories of spirits, gods, and the old ways. Their world moved by rhythm. Harvest, rain, birth, death, steady and familiar. Everything began to change the year the white men arrived with their uniforms, their flags, their strange books, and their promises of salvation. Behind them came a man who was not entirely theirs. He spoke the local tongue with ease, bowed respectfully before the chiefs, and knew how to dance to drumbeats without looking foolish. He introduced himself as Father Mbeal, a missionary priest, sent to bring the word of heaven. But there was something odd about him from the beginning. He was too familiar, too comfortable, as if he had always belonged here. His skin was the deep brown of the forest tribes, but his robes and cross belonged to the missionaries. His voice was calm, but his eyes never rested. They moved, searching every face, every shadow, every doorway, as though measuring something unseen. Yet he did not frighten the villagers. On the contrary, he won them quickly. He blessed sick children and they recovered. He prayed beside dying elders and they slipped away peacefully. He helped hunters find lost trails. He mediated family quarrels. And soon, everyone began to trust him. Everyone except the elders. They watched him with the silent caution of those who have seen many seasons and many lies. One elder in particular, Mukwa, the oldest man in Kimbala, felt something stirring beneath the priest's kindness. Something that moved like a serpent beneath grass. But even Mukwa could not deny the strange goodness that followed Father Mbeal. The rains, which had once come late, returned on time. The crops grew tall. The goats birthed twins. The women sang louder at evening markets. And laughter returned to the fireside. So when Father Mbeal asked the villagers to help him build a small chapel at the outskirts of Kimbala, no one objected. They worked for weeks, cutting timber, shaping clay bricks, carrying bundles of dried grass for the roof. And when it was finished, the chapel stood like a calm white shell beneath the sky. Simple, quiet, welcoming. Yet beside it, He ordered another structure to be built. Shed. Nearly the size of a room. With no windows. Only a heavy wooden door. People assumed it was a storage place for holy items. They did not question. Until the day the coffin arrived. It came on a cart pulled by 3 silent men whose faces no one recognized. The coffin was made of dark Iroko wood. Not the pale wood common in the region. The wood was old, heavy, and strangely polished. The sunlight did not reflect on it. Instead, it seemed to drink the light, swallowing it into its grain. The villagers watched quietly as the priest directed the coffin to be placed inside the windowless shed. He locked the door himself. No one knew where the key was kept. For weeks afterward, nothing unusual happened. Life continued as before. The priest prayed. The villagers attended his Sunday sermons, where he spoke not only of his God but also of ancestors, balance, and the unseen forces that shape destiny. He did not insult their traditions as the other missionaries did. He wove them together, and they loved him for it. Then came the first Thursday night. A young herder named Kafo was returning late from grazing cattle when he passed by the chapel. The moon was full. The wind was silent, and the world felt strangely still. From inside the shed, he heard chanting, low, rhythmic, ancient. But it was not just one voice. It was 2 voices, speaking the same words, the same time, perfectly matched. Kafo froze. His blood chilled. There were no windows in the shed. No way 2 people could be inside. No one ever entered but the priest. Unless something else was in there. The voices grew louder, rising, merging, splitting, echoing. Then silence. And after that silence, came a sound that did not belong to the living. A wet exhale. Like a breath taken after drowning. Kafo ran home without looking back. He told no one. He could not explain what he heard anyway. Words felt small beside that sound. Then came the second Thursday. And the third. And soon, whispers began to spread through the village like smoke. Someone heard footsteps circling the chapel at night, but saw no one there. Someone else swore the priest's shadow was longer than his body one morning, stretching like a rope on the ground. Children playing near the chapel claimed they saw a pale hand tapping against the coffin lid through the crack beneath the door. Their mothers shushed them. Their fathers laughed. But children do not lie about the things that live in silence. Still the priest smiled. He blessed the village. He continued his gentle kindness, his calm sermons, his soothing presence. So when he mentioned casually one afternoon that he would spend every Thursday in prayer inside the coffin, no one dared question him. To question a holy man was to question blessings. Besides, what did it matter? If he wanted to lie in a coffin to speak to God, that was his own affair. But something had begun to change in Kimbala. The graveyard no longer slept. Dogs refused to pass near it. Goats ran from it. Children woke crying from nightmares of hands pressing through soil, reaching for their ankles. At night, when the wind was soft, people heard voices from below the earth. Not screams, not moans, whispers. Calling names, one name at a time, calm and patient, as though waiting, as though wanting. And always, after the whispers, came footsteps. Measured, heavy, as though something beneath the ground was learning to walk again. The villagers grew uneasy. They spoke in hushed tones. But no one approached the priest. No one accused him. No one even dared ask. Because everything the priest touched still flourished. Harvests remained strong. Health remained steady. The rains still returned. And people fear curses, but they fear losing blessings more. So they ignored it, reassured themselves, until Nalia disappeared. Nalia, the young bride-to-be, full of laughter and light. She had been preparing for her wedding, gathering flowers with her friends near the woods. She stepped away to relieve herself, and never returned. The village searched for 3 days. Nothing. No tracks. No blood. No sign of struggle. Only one thing was found. A veil. Neatly folded. Placed on the chapel door. The priest said nothing. He only bowed his head. The elders gathered. The air thickened with quiet dread. And at last, Mukwa spoke the words no one else dared. We welcomed a man whose footsteps do not belong to the living. That night, when the moon rose full again, Father Mbeal prepared to enter the coffin as he always did. But this time, someone followed him. Someone who would see what was never meant to be seen. Someone who would learn why the priest sleeps inside a coffin every Thursday. And why the dead no longer stay dead. From the day Ebel saw him rise from the coffin, the village seemed to change. At first, the change was quiet, like a shift in the wind that no one could quite name. The chickens stopped scratching near the churchyard. The goats refused to graze near the path beside it. Children who used to chase each other across the open field now walked in pairs, nervously glancing toward the wooden chapel even in daylight. The villagers said nothing aloud, but rumors clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Ebel tried to act as though nothing had happened. He attended the early morning service, sweeping the chapel floor as Father Mbeal led prayers with his usual calm voice. But he noticed things. Small things. Things he would have ignored before. The father's shadow did not always match the movement of his body. When the morning sun shone through the doorway, the shadow fell wrong, slightly longer, slightly delayed. When he smiled, his eyes did not move. And the strangest thing of all, he never seemed tired, though Ebel knew he had not slept that night. The villagers still adored Father Mbeal. They praised his kindness. They repeated stories of his miracles. Healings, blessings, coincidences that felt divine. But now, beneath the admiration, there was something else. Something unspoken. Something like fear wearing the mask of love. Ebel knew he should tell someone. Tell his mother. Tell an elder. Tell anyone. But each time he tried, his throat tightened. His tongue felt heavy. As if something inside him whispered, "If you speak, he will know." Days passed. Thursdays returned. By the next Thursday night, Ebel could not stop thinking about the coffin. About the way Father Mbeal had risen. Slowly, gracefully, not like a man waking, but like something unfolding. He should stay home. He should sleep. He should pretend nothing happened. But curiosity is a kind of hunger. And hunger always returns. So he dressed quietly, slipped out into the moonlight, and followed the same path to the chapel. This time he did not go inside. He watched through the slats in the wooden wall. The chapel was still. Moonlight poured through the unshuttered windows in pale silver beams. The coffin sat at the front, lid already open. Father Mbeal entered silently, wearing white. His face calm as if he were entering his own bed. He lay down. His hands folded over his stomach. He closed his eyes. Ebel waited. 1 minute. 5. In. Stillness. Quiet. Then again movement. The priest's chest rose, but not like breathing. It swelled, then stilled. Then swelled again. Low. Too slow. And the air changed. Thickened. The silence felt full, like something unseen was in the room, just beyond vision. Then Father Mbeal's eyes snapped open. Not gently. Not naturally. As if a puppet's strings had been jerked. His pupils were white. Completely white. Ebel slapped his hand over his mouth to stop the scream that climbed up his throat. The priest sat up, but when his feet touched the floor, he did not step out of the coffin. He floated. Just a few inches, but he did not touch the ground. He began to speak. Not in the village tongue. Not in the missionary language. Not in any language Ebel had ever heard. The chapel walls trembled as if the sound itself pressed against them. It was not speech. It was ritual. All. Summoning. Ebel backed away slowly, leaves crunching underfoot. his heartbeat pounding so loud it felt as though it echoed into the night. He ran home, ran until his chest hurt, until sweat washed away reason, until he slammed into his mother's door and collapsed inside. But he said nothing. He did not sleep. In the morning, when the villagers gathered to greet the day, Father Mbeal was cheerful, radiant, a gentle smile on his lips, a fresh blessing for every child and elder he passed. But his eyes looked at Ebel differently. Not warm, not kind, knowing. The next days came with signs. The river near the village changed color, not fully, but deepening to a darker shade of blue that seemed heavy with something unseen. Fish floated to the surface, their bodies unmarked, their eyes pale. When women fetched water, they spoke in hushed voices, glancing toward the forest. The drummers of the night market stopped playing. They said the rhythms carried voices now. Not echoes, voices that did not belong to the living. The oldest fig tree in the square shed its leaves in a single night, though it was not the season for shedding. The village chief called for prayers. Father Mbeal agreed and led them. That night, the villagers gathered around the open field. A large fire burned. Drums sat silent at the edges. The priest stood at the center, arms outstretched. His voice was soft at first, soothing, but then powerful, too powerful, rising, echoing, bending the air. Ebel was among the crowd. His heart beat in his throat. He wanted to scream, "Stop. This is not prayer. This is something else." But the villagers listened with closed eyes, swaying. One woman began to shake. Violently. Her arms jerked. Her head dropped back. The crowd gasped. But Father Mbeal did not flinch. He stepped toward her, laid a hand on her head, and she collapsed, ill, silent. Everyone called it a miracle. They said the spirits of sickness had left her. But when Ebel looked at her, her eyes remained wide open, staring blankly at the sky. Tears slid down her cheek. But her body did not move. She was alive. But something inside her had gone. Ebel felt the truth like a cold knife in his stomach. Father Mbeal was not healing. He was taking. The villagers felt safer than ever, protected, blessed. They brought him gifts, yams, meat, cloth. They knelt when he passed. Children began to sing songs praising his name. The more they adored him, the heavier the air became. The more blessings he gave, the more the shadows deepened. The more he prayed, the more the birds fell silent. Meanwhile, Ebel could not sleep. Every night the same dream returned. He was in a dark room. He was lying in a coffin. His hands were folded over his chest. He could not move. He could not breathe. And Father Mbeal stood above him, smiling gently, whispering, "You understand now, don't you?" No matter how hard he tried to forget, the image clung to him like a second skin. One afternoon, as he fetched water, an elder stopped him. Elder Nkiru, thin, stooped, eyes sharp as flint. "You have seen something," she said. Ebel froze. "I have been watching you. You look like a child carrying a shadow too large." Ebel opened his mouth, but again words stuck. Elder Nkiru leaned in close. "You must not speak where his ears may hear. Come tonight. To the grove. When the moon rises." Ebel nodded slowly. Night came. The moon rose. He followed the path behind the old granary, past the maize fields, to the grove where the air always felt cold. Elder Nkiru was waiting. "You saw him," she said. Not a question. Ebel swallowed. "Yes." She closed her eyes. "He is not new to this land. He is not what the missionaries believe him to be. We knew his name once. Long ago. Before they called him Father. Before he wore white. He was something else. Something ancient. Something that walks between the living and the dead." Ebel felt his blood chill. "Why does he sleep in the coffin?" he whispered. "To remember what he truly is," she said. Lightning flickered in the distance, though no storm had been foretold. You must be careful, she whispered. He chooses. And once he chooses. She did not finish. Branches rustled. A step. Abel turned. Father Mbeal stood in the grove, smiling. Not surprised. Not angry. Just smiling. My children, he said softly. Why are we whispering in the dark? Abel felt his breath vanish. Elder Nkiru did not move. The priest stepped closer, and the night seemed to bend toward him. Come, he said. The night is not safe for wandering. There are spirits in these woods. His eyes gleamed faintly. But just for a moment. Abel knew then. He could see in the dark because he was made of it. And the rising had only begun. Night fell like a shroud over the village. The moon, pale and thin like the blade of a sickle, hung in the sky, barely illuminating the world below. The wind was still. Too still. Even the crickets had stopped their song, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Amara and the remaining villagers moved quietly through the narrow path that cut through the forest, guided only by flickering oil lamps and a fear too heavy to speak aloud. No one wanted to be here. But no one could turn back now. The coffin waited. It was Thursday night. And the priest, the man who was not a man, would be inside it soon. The forest was dense, its trees tall and gnarled, their branches twisting into clawed fingers above. Shadows layered upon shadows. The leaves whispered though there was no wind, speaking in voices too soft to understand but too real to ignore. Amara led the front, her jaw tense, her breath controlled. But her hands trembled. Behind her, old Kofi stumbled forward. His son had been taken 3 nights ago. The boy had simply stood up in the middle of the night, eyes glazed, and walked out of the house. His footprints led into the forest, straight toward the church, and vanished at the coffin's door. They had never seen him again. Tonight they would end this. Or die trying. They reached the clearing. The old colonial church loomed like a tomb carved for gods too ancient to remember. The walls, once white, were stained brown and black, as if time itself rejected this place. The cross at the top had long since rusted into something twisted and unfamiliar. And there, before the altar, stood the coffin. Black oak, polished to a mirror. Beautiful. Terrifying. Almost alive. Amara swallowed hard. She could feel it watching her. Not with eyes. Not with form. But with presence. A whisper slithered across the clearing. You came. Not a sound. A voice inside their bones. The villagers froze. And then he stepped out from the shadows. Father Mukasa. Still wearing the priest's robe. Still holding the rosary. Still smiling that calm, gentle smile. But his feet did not disturb the dirt. His shadow did not match his body. And his eyes were not eyes. They were dark, bottomless. Not the absence of light, but the eater of light. Amara forced her voice to remain steady. You are not Mukasa. You are not of God. That smile widened. Too wide. Inhumanly so. You are correct. The voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. God abandoned this land long before your ancestors learned to speak. Old Kofi dropped to his knees, trembling. Give me back my son, please, please, please. Mukasa moved in one smooth, gliding step, placing a hand on the old man's head. The villagers gasped. The skin on Kofi's face began to sink inward, drying, shriveling, cracking, as though decades were devouring him in seconds. Amara screamed. She swung the ceremonial blade, striking Mukasa's arm. The blow connected. But Mukasa's flesh did not bleed. Split, like clay cracking. And beneath it, writhing roots, black, pulsing, like veins stolen from something beneath the soil. The priest turned his head to meet her eyes. There was no anger, only inevitability. I do not harm them, he whispered. I harvest. The coffin lid began to open. Slowly, silently. as though something inside was pushing upward. The villagers stepped back as the darkness inside the coffin rose in a thick, living cloud. Not smoke, not mist, something hungry, something aware. Amara shouted, "Close the coffin! Now!" They rushed forward. But the darkness struck like a wave, hurling them backward, slamming them against the trees. Father Mukasa spread his arms, like a shepherd welcoming his flock. "Every Thursday," he said softly, "I return to the soil so the roots may feed." The ground beneath them trembled. The earth split. Hands, hundreds of them, small, frail, childlike, reached upward from the soil, clawing for escape, clawing for help, clawing. Amara recognized one of them. The bracelet, the beads, the carvings. Kofi's son. He was still alive. Buried. Trapped. Screaming with his hands. Kofi lunged forward, crying out his son's name, but Mukasa touched him again. And the old man crumbled entirely, turning to dust, blown away by the same wind that did not exist. The villagers screamed and scattered, but the forest closed around them. Branches snapped downward, forming walls. Roots burst from the ground, wrapping around ankles. There was no escape. The darkness poured from the coffin, rising, shaping itself, slowly, into a figure with no face, no form, only hunger. Amara held the ceremonial blade tight. She remembered the elder's words. "The curse is bound to the coffin. Break the coffin. Break the priest." The blade glowed faintly. Not magic. Blood. Generations of victims had stained it. Ran. The darkness chased her, twisting around her legs, her arms, whispering her name in her mother's voice, her father's voice, her own voice. "Amara! Amara! Amara!" She screamed, leaping forward, and drove the blade into the coffin lid. A sound like mountains collapsing ripped through the forest. Mukasa's face finally changed. The smile broke. His eyes widened. And his voice, no longer soft, shook the world. "No!" The coffin cracked. Light, real light, sunlight, morning, memory, burst from the wound. The children's hands stopped clawing. Their voices gone silent. The darkness shrieked, twisting, recoiling, burning. Amara drove the blade deeper. The coffin shattered. The darkness exploded outward, then vanished. And Mukasa fell, his body crumbling into dry, lifeless soil. The forest went quiet. The moon shone again. The crickets returned. Amara collapsed, gasping, shaking, covered in dirt and tears. The children did not emerge. None of them came back. The earth held their silence. The curse was ended. But the price had already been paid. When dawn finally came, its light fell pale and cold over the village. Smoke still rose from the smoldering torches. The ground lay torn where the roots had writhed. And the church, once the heart of prayer, now stood as nothing but rotted wood and broken stone, collapsing slowly under the growing sun. Amara stood alone. The villagers who had survived remained in their homes, doors barred, eyes hollow. No one spoke. No one cried. Grief had dried into something silent and deep, like ashes after fire. Amara walked toward the graves of the children, her steps heavy. She placed the ceremonial blade in the soil, burying it, not to forget, but to seal what must never rise again. The wind moved gently through the trees now. The forest breathed freely for the first time in generations. Yet peace was not victory. It was simply what remained. Days passed. The village rebuilt its walls. Families learned to speak again. Fields were planted, songs were sung, and life, slowly, painfully, returned. But every Thursday night, they lit a lantern in the center of the village and let it burn until morning. Not out of fear, but in remembrance that there are things older than prayer, that not every holy face is holy, that sometimes evil wears a blessing like a mask. And that courage is not the absence of terror, but walking into it anyway. Amara did not leave the village. She stayed. She grew older. She told the story to every child who came after, so they would never forget. Because curses do not begin with magic. They begin with silence. Moral of the story: when a community refuses to question what they are told to worship, they open their doors to the very thing that will consume them. Blind faith is not devotion. It is surrender. If you hear someone say, "Do not question the holy man," ask anyway. And remember, some curses do not hide in the dark. They preach in the daylight. This was Scary African Tales by Sanaa. If you are still here, you are one of us now. Until next Thursday. Sleep with caution.